Welcome back. So we're going to take a slight sidestep from our normal fare, and we're going to be talking about what the Trump win means to housing. And it wasn't just a win. It was the biggest grand slam probably in the history of politics. Yes. And we don't normally talk about politics on this podcast, but today I think it's worth talking about because not only did Trump win the presidency, but the Republicans now control the Senate and they control Congress. And so what we're going to talk about is what this is going to mean for housing, what it's going to mean for your real estate businesses, what it's going to mean for your local communities, and obviously what it's going to mean for your pocketbooks. And Julie and I do not have a script or a presentation for today.
No, we were watching the election results, as I'm sure most of you probably were. So, and we're also operating on caffeine and not a whole lot of sleep.
That's right.
Full disclosure.
Yeah, because we just got back from traveling, or Julie did. So look, that's what we're going to talk about today. And I want to start out by saying probably the best stance to have in your community, unless you live in a really firmly blue place or a firmly red place, is to be a Republicrat, where that essentially means you don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other. Because in most of our communities across the country, electoral map aside,
sure,
you're going to have a lot of people that are probably a little confused about the election, especially if they're Democrats. So do be sensitive to that, and do take into consideration that as a real estate practitioner, it's your job to help everyone, regardless of what their political leanings are. So with that said, Julie, let's get into this. First of all, were you surprised by what a clean sweep it was?
I was, and I have to say, I feel relieved that it was a clean sweep. I think that's probably point number one, simply because that should create less controversy, less back and forth, less turmoil. I like the resolution of it. Regardless of what side anybody is on, just having a clean resolution, I think, is a good thing for the country.
Meaning it won't drag on for weeks and weeks as people fight over ballots and all these...
And lawsuits and all that.
Exactly. It was a complete blowout is really what it was.
Yes.
Nobody was really predicting that aside from President Trump.
Exactly.
He was predicting it, but nobody else. Yeah. Well, so... let's just kind of go from macro and then we can kind of lean into some specifics. We've studied really what the different housing policies were for Trump versus Harris. And a lot of the housing policy stuff, it was really in stark contrast. We did a podcast, I think it was on Monday, Julie, where it was a replay of one we did where I was talking about what their published housing policies will be. But now that there's a complete blowout and Trump has control of, essentially, the Senate, the Congress, and obviously the White House for at least the next 2 years, there are some other things that he talked about doing for housing, which is definitely going to be happening in probably a community near you. And I'm going to start out with a couple obvious ones. And again, we've talked about this on the podcast. Some of this stuff is a little wonkish, but it's relevant. So we're going to tell you what it is, and then we're going to tell you why it matters. First of all, there is no doubt there's going to be I'll call it a reconstitution of Fanny and Freddy. So Fanny and Freddy have been in conservatorship since I think 15 or 16 years after the housing crash in 2008. So what it was is essentially Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were private institutions with a government backing. They're called GSEs, government-sponsored enterprises. And after the housing crisis, the government basically took those over. And what that did is essentially, I would say, the government control over the mortgage industry has been what everyone's been dealing with ever since. It's not all good, not all bad. I'm not saying that it is. But one of the things that Trump promised he was going to do, and this is something that it's in writing, and it's, if you want to research this, Google Rand Paul Trump, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, conservatorship, and you'll read some letters that he wrote back and forth with the then congressman. No, it was Ron Paul, actually. No, maybe it was Rand. I don't remember. Anyway, so the gist of it is there's going to be a lot of new mortgage products that are going to come available, because when Fannie and Freddie go private, that means that it's going to open the doors for a lot of other banks to want to start competing. Because what's happened is there's not really that many different mortgage products out there, because the government's had essentially a monopoly on the mortgage markets. And granted, there's been some benefits to that. But at the end of the day, what we're going to see is a freeing up of different mortgage products. And you're going to see all kinds of different creative things that are going to start being offered. And a lot of that is going to solve a lot of the affordability problems, because, we might have amortizations that are no longer 30 years, they're 40 years. We're going to see all kinds of different, equity sharing businesses, I think. Mortgage companies that basically might take a equity position in your house and they get a % of the upside when you decide to sell it, versus paying, X in interest rate, you're now going to pay a lower amount or something like that. All these different scenarios are going to come to play. And that's, I think, going to be exciting for a lot of folks in the mortgage industry, frankly, but it should be exciting for a lot of you guys as well.
That's right. A competitive or a more competitive mortgage market is a good thing for our real estate market. where buyers have a lot more choices. You know, the talking point has been how unaffordable homes have been, and what we can all do together to alleviate that. And certainly having more choices and creative mortgages. When we were selling real estate, there were more choices than there are now. So I think we should all be very frosty on watching what those new mortgage products could be. There's been some discussion about a 40-year mortgage to stretch out the years so that the payment goes down. And of course, we're all watching interest rates. But yes, and I think that we'll be frosty on that and do some podcasts as we see new mortgage products come out.
So here's something else we're definitely going to see. And actually, it's funny. Elon Musk is already doing this. There's going to be the emergence of new communities, new cities that are going to start being built. And
that's going to be so exciting.
I know. It is cool, actually.
I love it.
I mean, the last time we saw something like that happen really was during the housing crisis. There were like areas in Arizona that were just deserts that essentially were being built into cities, and they've turned out to be really great communities. That's what we're really going to see, too. We're going to see a lot of these communities, a lot of these, I think, densely populated areas where real estate's gotten really expensive and people that work there really can't afford to live in there. You're going to see a lot of these sort of, rural adjacent communities. They're going to start becoming boom towns of their own as the government, and this has happened before. And again, we talked about this on previous podcasts, but during, after World War II, there are entire communities around the United States that were built up to give a place for the returning soldiers to live. And the FHA actually, the VA was able to do all kinds of preferential mortgages and all these other things. That's going to happen again for sure.
Yes, well, and because Trump won, we have to highlight one of the things he said was taking federal land. Like, think about Vegas, all the land around.
But not
that.
just happen for veterans, just to let me finish my sentence, but happen for everybody. So there's going to be an expansion of affordable housing through new communities. The idea of making existing housing more affordable isn't going to happen. So you're going to have to build new communities that are going to be, those older community adjacent type, and like I said, semi-rural areas.
And there is tons of land out there. I was using Vegas as an example, and one of my coaching clients in Phoenix, she sells in more urban Phoenix, but you were talking about adjacent communities. There's 2 communities near her that were 3D printed home communities that are doing very well, and those are in the mid 400s. So a more affordable price. New construction is great. So I would look for maybe some new cities, new towns, and certainly, hopefully, the rebuilding of places like Asheville is going to bring some housing too.
Well, that's for sure. Along that, you mentioned this 3D printed houses and all this different kind of new construction. Setting aside construction expense, which is one of the reasons why new homes are so expensive, and obviously the inflation, a lot of building materials, though that's coming down now. Elon Musk, and you guys should Google this. I think it's called Boxed. It was yeah, that's right. Isn't it Boxed?
Yes, but I think it is under the Tesla brand. I think it's a Tesla house.
So Elon Musk is building a community. I think it's in Austin and maybe it was Houston. I don't remember which, but he did invest in a company called Boxed. And if you go to their website and check it out, it's kind of cool.
It's really cool.
Basically, it's a collapsible home. That doesn't sound good on the surface.
Well, we'll say modular kind of.
Well, modular means it's pre-built. This isn't pre-built. This is delivered on a flatbed, basically. And what happens is everything essentially folds out.
Yeah.
Like what are those?
It's like
things?
an origami house.
Exactly, origami, right? And so and then you can put 2 or 3 or 4 of them together and basically have a really cool looking house. And the neat thing is that the materials that they're made of are metal and very high tech, foam and things like that. Foam doesn't sound that high tech, but when you look at the insulation value of foam versus traditional rollout stuff, it's extraordinary.
Do you remember the pricing on that? I remember it was pretty good. I thought it was.
It was less than $150,000.
Yeah.
I think the initial one was like 129. But like I said, what happens is if you want, maybe you want 2,500 square feet, right? Then you put 3 or 4 of them together.
Sure.
But that's what we're going to see for sure. And then you can. Well, how is that going to be possible? Well, it's because you're going to have a lot of people that are using. Guess what? Starlink. And a lot of people are going to be able to do other things to make it so that they can digitally commute. Because there's no doubt that we're entering into a world where people don't necessarily have to be centrally located in cities as much as they used to. And then, there's been talk of high-speed rail connecting all these new cities with the larger cities. Those are all the types of things that I think we can look forward to with confidence. So if I were you and I were in a market where it makes sense that this type of community might be built, you start looking for signs that it's actually going to start happening. I'll tell you guys this is very interesting. Julie and I are friends with someone who's a big land developer in Arizona, Josh.
Yeah.
And he was telling us that there was this weird trend that he was seeing. This massive swath of land that he had developed was being bought by people that were leaving New York City and reforming a community community out in Arizona, and the actual people that were doing this reformation of a community were the types of Jews that were in New York City.
Oh, Ashkenazi.
Ashkenazi Jew. No, it wasn't
No.
Ashkenazi.
Was it?
It,
Orthodox.
Orthodox Jews, yeah. So
Yes, very interesting.
There was a massive amount of them that are leaving New York, and they're going out and forming this new community in Arizona. You know, again, going to the fact that this type of new construction is allowing for people to have a little bit more flexibility in where they live. And so, Julie, let's talk about the fact that it's believed that the Trump administration is going to get rid of a lot of the regulation and the things that have been slowing down the housing markets.
Yes, that's right. And for those of you who maybe woke up and were disappointed today, but you are in real estate, remember that our second-time president is a developer at heart. That's a good thing. Okay, so deregulation to spur development. Trump advocates for reducing regulations that stifle housing development. Remember, our big story has always been lack of inventory, right? So by making it easier and cheaper for developers to build, he aims to increase the housing supply, potentially also lowering prices, at least on the new construction. However, rapid deregulation might lead to speculative development. We'll just have to see. I think it's too soon to tell as far as how that affects prices. But yes, more development, less regulation.
Yeah, and so that's going to, again, create more opportunity. So where you're going to probably see a lot of growth rapidly, like in the next 24 months, is you're probably going to see a lot of the new construction builders get a lot more creative with the types of things that they build and where they're going to build them. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if once Fanny and Freddy go private again, which is definitely going to happen, you're going to see all kinds of different mortgage products. Right now, for example, if you wanted to get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage on, to use Julie's example, something of prefab in nature, it's really hard to do that. They consider it a trailer, and trailer financing is different than all the rest of it. They'd only lend on the value of the land. A lot of that stuff's going to change as the mortgage markets are forced to become more competitive. And again, you're going to see a lot of these new builders, the existing builders, they're going to say, hey, guess what? We can make money if we start building a different type of product in different communities. And this is going to be the only solution really to the lack of inventory in the market, because there's really no reason to believe that there's going to be a huge deluge. Thank you. I told you guys I was tired of homes coming for sale.
They literally can't build them fast enough, even with less regulation. And we've seen the demand is meeting the supply. So as things get built, it just gets gobbled up. I mean, look at new construction virtually anywhere in the country. It's almost all in contract.
Now let's talk about something that'll be controversial.
Sure.
Okay, so the commission sharing lawsuits and the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you guys hadn't been following politics at all, and Julie and I truthfully don't follow it that hard, but we try to avoid politics, frankly. But there's no doubt that the Department of Justice is going to have a house cleaning, which means a lot of the regulators that were in place, or a lot of the attorneys and a lot of the litigation that came as a result of the commission sharing lawsuit, probably is going to get relitigated, probably is going to get another look. Basically it might get reversed, or at least some of the haziness about the ramifications on real estate are going to be clarified. Again, getting back to deregulation. You're also going to see in some, like, for example, if you're in Silicon Valley, there's been actually kind of a stymieing of growth, because a lot of the mergers and acquisitions things that would have normally been happening have essentially come to a halt. That's the reason you're not hearing about a lot of mergers and acquisitions and IPOs and all the rest of it. It's because the overregulation, this is one argument, right? The overregulation of that industry, or industries in general, there were two grocery store chains that tried to basically merge. It was like Kroger and something else. And then the Department of Justice said, nope, that'll be too close to monopoly. You guys could be monopolistic. And then all these things have slowed down the formation of new industries, of new jobs, of new opportunities. So anytime there's overregulation, anytime there's too many rules, especially rules that are kind of heavy-handed, it slows things down. I'm not saying, guys, trust me, I'm not saying that there doesn't need to be some level of regulation on things. But when there's too much regulation, too many rules, how many forms do you guys have to fill out now when you do a real estate transaction?
Gosh, it's epic.
I feel sorry for DocuSign, but the moral of the story is a lot of the stuff, as you know, because you're in the real estate industry, it just conflicts sometimes with each other. It doesn't make sense. And it's really prevented a lot of buyers, and I think first-time buyers in particular, from being able to purchase homes, because it's really confusing. Especially with this new commission-sharing lawsuit, the exclusive buyer agency, that's really adversely affecting first-time buyers. And I think we're going to see a lot of reversals or a lightening of the load with regards to the regulations on that stuff, and construction and all kinds of new financing options. So overall, obviously, we're very optimistic about what's going to be happening in the future with regards to housing, and you should too. Now, you add to all of this that, guys, what did Trump do with interest rates in his first term? He basically was, he doesn't directly control interest rates, but he certainly has influence on it. So there's no reason to believe that interest rates aren't going to go down. There's no reason to believe there's not going to be more optimism in housing. The guy's a housing...
More supply.
More supply. The guy's a housing, guy. So if you look into next year, and this is what Julie and I have been predicting. Now, we weren't sure who was going to win, so we weren't predicting presidential elections. Again, we try not to be political, but the reality of it is if you look at pure demographics, if you look at essentially all the macro trends in the economy, there was no reason to believe that the wind wasn't going to finally be at the industry's back with regards to, I think, buoyant housing sales going forward. And that's absolutely what the Trump win, especially considering the Senate and the Congress, the whole clean sweep, that's what it's going to mean to housing. Housing is going to have I think, almost a overwhelming comeback into 25, into 26, that it's going to be to the point where people are, it's going to be so, I think, such a pronounced comeback, such a significant return to sanity and housing. So many people, so much money, so many, you think about, like, for example, when a house sells, what was the old number, Julie? There was like an additional $60 grand that's spent per house.
Yeah, I think on average, 50 to 60 grand between, that's counting like furniture and making it your own, the painter, the carpenter, the home repairs from the inspection, all of the things, right? Landscaping, making it your own. People go out and spend money after they close.
Well, so yeah, that's the thing. So for every home sale, there's all these other, people that were getting employed and getting paid. And
good for the economy.
And when home sales slowed down, there was all those painters and candlestick makers and landscapers that weren't getting paid. So all of that, we can look forward to having that be a big turnaround. So the pendulum, this is what Julie and I talked about on our show, and we talked about this a lot ourselves. The pendulum in life has a tendency, especially in politics, to swing too far to the left or too far to the right, and then eventually it makes its way back to the middle. So I guess, based on the amount of states that voted for Trump, which was, basically all of them, that you're looking at essentially the pendulum swung too far to the left and people just had enough. And now it's going to swing probably, if we're just, it's probably going to swing too far to the right. And then within the next 24 months or so, it's going to be somewhere in the middle around, and people are going to feel like finally there's sanity back in the government. That's what we're optimistically hoping for. Again, trying not to be political because we don't want to trigger anybody. But there's no reason to believe that the best years in housing, well, clearly the best years in housing are ahead of us. But the question is are the best years of you being a real estate agent and housing still ahead of you?
Well, that's right. And let me just bring this back to present day. Like, you guys have houses to sell, houses to list today, tomorrow, this week. Remember, we were reporting 2 weeks ago that buyers who were polled, who had self-stated that they plan on buying in the next 6 months or less. Something like 40% of those buyers said, we're waiting till after the election.
Yep.
Okay? We're after the election. Call your buyers. Do your lead follow-up today. We have a huge objection that has just been released, okay? And I think that the collective unconscious is a sense of relief, hopefully a sense of enthusiasm.
Do you feel like that?
I do. I really do.
I feel a sense of relief just so I can
resolution.
Well, I'm tired of getting all the damn texts.
Oh my gosh, seriously. Yes, that's right. Your texts are calmer today, aren't they, folks?
You notice that?
Okay. So now it's time to get to work. Now it's time to pay attention to some of these new programs, the enthusiasm for the real estate market. Now's the time to talk to your past clients, do your lead follow-up, set up an open house this weekend, get to work. We don't have that big lingering objection, I want to wait until after the election. That's gone. So I think that's a great thing.
Well, now they're going to say, I want to wait till after the holidays, right? I mean, that's just the normal human behavior.
Well,
but when you just going to Julie's point about making this practical, which I certainly appreciate, when you do hear an objection like, I want to wait till after the holidays, you got to ask them, okay, well, so if there was a reason that putting the home, I appreciate the fact you want to wait till after the holidays, and that's probably the best thing for you. Let me ask you a real quick question. If there was a real financial, obvious benefit to you putting the house for sale now, in other words, potentially tens of thousands of dollars more profit or money in your pocket, would you still want to wait? Oh, by the way, not just more money in your pocket, Mr. Seller, but also you having more control of the transaction. Would you still want to wait until the spring? Now, what you're going to see is, most of them are going to say, yeah, we'd still want to wait for after the holidays. But you're going to have 3 or 4 that are going to say something along the lines of, well, tell me more. So then you roll into the second part of it. And again, this is all part of Premier Coaching. So you guys, and we're talking about this every day in our Premier Coaching sessions with our Harris certified coaches. So then you roll into the next part. Well, Mr. Seller, the fact is this time of year, there are fewer homes for sale. There's no doubt. But here's the really amazing thing that a lot of agents, frankly, don't recognize. The buyers that are out there looking right now are the most motivated buyers you're going to find. In the spring, you got a lot of looky-loos, but at this time of year, you've got people that absolutely want to buy. Otherwise, they wouldn't be looking for a home. Really, it's the relocating buyers. It's the buyers that maybe have a home that they sold and now they're maybe renting and they wanted to be in a new home by the end of the year. It's all the buyers that are looking now, especially if you're in a colder snow state like where Julie and I are from in Ohio. No one's out there trudging through snow and slipping on ice if they're not serious about buying a house. And you can, edit that aspect of it depending on your market. And then, you can point out to the seller. And Mr. Seller, here's the other thing. Because there are fewer homes for sale this time of year, and because we know the buyers are better quality this year, maybe use a different word other than quality, but you get the idea, you're going to have more control of the transaction. So not only will you be able to sell the house now, but you're also going to be able to have more control of the closing date, and maybe they're not going to be so picky when it comes to inspections, versus putting it on the market in the spring. And Mr. Seller, will there be more listings in the spring or fewer listings in the spring? And the seller's going to say more listings in the spring. Okay, that's exactly right. So if there's more listings in the spring and you put your house for sale, let's say, for example, November or December, and the house closes, and guess what? In the spring, you're going to then have more inventory to pick through versus for your next house that you want to buy, if you don't want to buy new construction, and we want to help you find a resale. So, versus say, for example, having your house for sale in the spring, when there is generally more activity, but there's also more homes for sale, which means your house is going to have more competition, which means it might not net the same. So you're timing it, and you're timing it to your benefit. So if that were something, is that something that's important to you? And see what they say. And again, you can cut that down, and that's not the exact script. Those are more talking points to help motivate you.
Well, and remember, we are in November, okay? So if they truly want to, maybe one of their holiday objections is, I don't want to move during the holidays. Well, your buyer probably doesn't want to move during the holidays either. So let's say that you're 60 days in contract. You're both moving in January. You can handle the dates, right? So, of course, we're not going to have showings on Christmas Eve. We're not going to have showings, nobody's going to want to do that. So I will manage the showing activity for you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. And remember, there will be fewer showings, but better showings, better quality showings, to your point, Tim, about more motivated buyers. So we can handle that. But remember where you are in the year, sometimes deals take a little while to close anyway. We can manage all of that and make all of your dates make sense. And I think particular to the luxury market, your point about relocation, there have been a lot of expireds that have come on the market that could potentially sell, in the next 60 days.
All right, so 2 points to that. And you talk about expireds. I'm going to talk about this other.
Sure.
So if they still say, I want to wait until the spring to put the house for sale, don't make the mistake of assuming your idea of what the spring is the same as theirs.
Right.
So ask them what spring means to them. And, explain to them that really, so we want to have the house back for sale, say, for example, in March. Okay, that's great. March is perfect. So that means we need to be talking early January and getting the house, all the things necessary to get the house for sale. So we maximize the market. And let's plan on having the house for sale like by maybe the 3rd or 4th week in February. So we're ahead of the market, ahead of all the new listings. That makes sense? And they'll say yes. And now here's the key thing. You got to stay on those sellers, because over the next 2 months, those sellers are going to Christmas parties. They're going to talk to their uncle who just got a real estate license, all the things. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have to stay top of mind with those sellers if you expect that listing to be yours. The smart agent is going to get that contract signed now. So you try to get the seller to agree to the exclusive now, and that way you don't have to worry about somebody swooping in and getting a listing from you. I had that happen. It was 3 perfect listings. That's a lesson.
Painful lesson.
It was. You remember?
We still remember.
Yeah. They each were like, $800 million, $1.2 million homes. And they're all going to list with us in the spring. And Julie and I gave them Christmas presents and the whole thing. And, we're obviously very social, but it wasn't enough. One of our neighbors who just got her real estate license, who had these 3 adorable little kids. We didn't even know she had a real estate license. Had this Christmas party, and of course didn't invite us, but invited all the neighbors. Mm-hmm. And so she was able to make friends with one of these potential sellers, and they all knew each other. And the next thing you know, all 3 of them listed with her.
Can you tell we're scarred by this experience? That's why we share it with you.
I called the main one who had influence on the others, and I said, "What's the story?" And he goes, "Well, she was calling us every day." Basically, he said, even though we were doing what we thought at the time was a great lead follow-up, we were staying on top of them, the whole thing. she was really on top of them, and they just thought, he actually said to me, well, our perception was that you were just too busy and, whatever. Because what she did, knowing that she was competing with us, and she said, well, you guys will be my main customers. Tim and Julie are so busy. They sell hundreds of homes per year. So she used our strength against us and made it into a weakness. But it's our fault ultimately because we weren't essentially staying on top of those potential sellers. Don't make the same mistake. That was very expensive for us.
Yes, that's right. This is why we highly recommend, this is a hot topic in our Premier Coaching. When you're in this situation where it's kind of a longer time frame to take the listing, do go over to their house. You can have a staging conversation. You can just pop by. You can bring them, we're doing the wrapping paper project in Premier Coaching where you do pop buys.
Well, Julie,
be top of mind.
Act as if you already have the listing. Like even
Yes.
if you don't have the exclusive sign, implement your new listing checklist, assuming you have one. If you don't, we've got one for you on Premier Coaching. By the way, you guys can join Premier Coaching right now for free. Just go to premiercoaching.com or text the word Premier to 47372. And yes, that does include a daily semi-private coaching call with a Harris certified coach. You could also, if you're watching us on YouTube or listening to us on Spotify, YouTube, or iTunes, etc., there's a link to join below. Just go to premiercoaching.com. It's the easy button to get, really, frankly, to build a lot of momentum into the year. So let's talk about expired since you mentioned that. Okay?
Yes. Okay. So a lot has happened in the past week. We had Halloween. We had the month change. We had an election, right? Meanwhile, what happens when the month changes? Maybe you didn't notice because you were out trick-or-treating with your kids. We have a lot of expireds, and you were talking about some of your calls, and I also interviewed my private coaching clients, and to a person, there was a big increase in expireds. A huge, like 3 times the normal expireds.
Well, Dan, as I mentioned last week,
Yeah.
his normal expireds were 30 a day, and he had 300.
Well, that's even, that's 10 times.
So let's tell them why. Let's decode that in case
Sure.
they're not seasoned expired hunters and
Yep.
hopefully motivate them. So most agents wrongfully, and agents don't make this mistake, have their listings expire on the first of the month or the last of the month. Most agents will choose the last of the month. It's a 6-month listing, so you're going to have it expire on October 31st. Well, that's a huge mistake because that's when essentially anybody who's a little bit experienced in real estate knows there's going to be a peak in expireds. So if you're going to set, first of all, you should never have an expiration date on your listing contract. You should have essentially an easy exit listing, and you write the listing contract and you put a year or 2 years on the listing contract, but you're also giving them an addendum that gives them an out in the event that, they want to fire you. So the main thing is to have a long listing contract. That way you don't have to worry about your listing showing up in the MLS as expired. And don't have your expirations be on the dates when most people, agents sometimes only start working expireds on the first day and the last day, and they don't work expireds any other day. Mm-hmm. And this is all the mailers and all the other things. So have your listings expire on holidays. So if you're going to have a listing expire, have it be on Christmas or have it be on Thanksgiving. Because most agents aren't going to have the courage, frankly, or I think the audacity to call on actual holidays. So choose days where your competition is going to be doing their own personal things, but also they're not going to be, wanting to be rude, I think, inappropriate, truthfully,
Sure.
and calling on holidays. So that's a little advanced player tip for you. Now, on the flip side to it is, if you're not building inventory, at least by going after expireds, you're missing one of the biggest opportunities in real estate. Because in most cases, most of the expiring listings, it wasn't because of the price. You assume it was overpriced. I wouldn't make that assumption. It's a rookie mistake. Oftentimes, it was a whole bunch of other reasons, and we teach you in Premier Coaching. One of the scripts we teach you guys to use when you're talking with expireds is, Mr. Seller, sometimes the best homes don't sell. And it's not for the reason you've probably been told, because the previous listing agent probably definitely in many cases have the skill set to have the seller properly reposition the house in the market. It could have been all kinds of different things, but the previous listing agent, again, saying it twice, didn't have the experience to know how to counsel that seller to position the house on the market. We teach you to do that in Premier Coaching. But again, just really emphasizing this because it's so critically important. Do not enter into your conversations with that expired listings assuming price is the problem. Because if it was overpriced 6 months ago, if it was overpriced 12 months ago, and the market is now stronger than it was before, not only is that house not overpriced now, but it's probably maybe even underpriced.
That's right. Remember, the average appreciation in the country this year has been 5%. When you do a price reduction, usually it's about 5%. So if you put all those months in between, that expired might actually be priced correctly. And to your point, in some cases, we've seen them go up a little bit if it's an older expired, and you can still get it. And remember, when we're talking about holiday objections, you do have less competition fourth quarter and the beginning of first quarter, especially in the snowy states. So what percentage, and this is your homework assignment, what percentage of that avalanche of expireds that happened when the month turned over a few days ago, what percentage of those expireds have to sell? They are moving.
Well, let's talk about that. So we know statistically, and Julie and I have done a lot of research on this over the last couple decades as coaches, and the research tells us that something like 90% of all expireds not only relist, but they sell within the next 180 days. And generally speaking, your biggest competition for that expired listing is the previous listing agent. But the previous listing agent, your biggest competitor for that listing, is also, frankly, almost certainly ruled themselves out because of the fact that they let it expire the first time. Mm-hmm. And the seller is only will only lean into the previous listing agent because they don't want to go through the process of then interviewing a bunch of other agents. They don't want to actually do the work to find a new agent. And, they figure they're going to give Bob a second chance. And, maybe Bob's blamed the interest rates or convinced them that, the market conditions were against the house getting sold. All Bob's excuses basically have maybe made it so that they feel a little compassionate for him or considering giving him an extension. Well, if there's nobody else that's offering a compelling reason why they shouldn't relist with Bob, they're going to relist with Bob. And that's what happens most of the time. But you got to keep in mind, Bob didn't know what the hell he was doing the first time. He doesn't know what he's doing the second time.
We teach that objection handler, by the way.
Well, we don't say it like that, though.
No. We say it nicer.
So, Mr. Seller, I'm curious what Bob's going to do differently this time to get the home sold that he didn't try the first time. And then move right. That's, for example, when you call an expired and they say, well, I'm just going to relist with my previous agent. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, but I'm curious. What is your old agent going to do this time that they didn't already try the first time to get the property sold?
And then you have to not talk.
Because
they'll
exactly.
always pause and they'll think about it and they'll say, gosh, I never really looked at it that way. And now you continue your conversation.
Exactly. And we teach you guys how to do this in Premier Coaching. But really what I'm hoping you are taking away from this is that you are, as we are very fond of saying, because we firmly believe it, Julie and I are by nature cautiously optimistic. We're not just, 100% optimistic bouncing off the walls. We're cautiously optimistic. But I have to say, in the last 4 years, this is the most optimistic that I personally have felt.
I would agree with that.
I'm excited. I'm actually, I'm joyful for the country. I'm joyful for housing. I think there's been a lot of social experimentation that's been going on that has caused a lot of Americans to be at each other's throats, in some cases literally. And finally, we're going to see a turn of all of that. And I think we're going to see it really quick. And if you don't believe me, just look at the results. The results for the election was an overwhelming rejection of what's been going on in the last 4 years. And don't take that offensively. And if you do, I do apologize, because here's why it matters. That has caused you some financial despair. It has caused a lot of inflation. It has caused financial hardship in your communities. It has caused a lot of Americans to get so frustrated and downtrodden in a lot of ways, to the extent that, guess what happened? They threw the old party out in such a meaningful way. I mean, it's ridiculous, honestly.
It is.
I don't think anybody predicted, like I said, outside of Trump, there was going to be such a grand slam. House, Senate, and the White House. I mean, come on.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the enthusiasm. I feel especially enthusiastic about inventory roaring back. And I think this is going to become a talking point probably in the next 30 to 60 days, because assuming that we do see that enthusiasm, and I do think we will, because of what we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, rates will come down, inventory will go up. We have the specter of the election drama behind us. I think that you're going to see people getting back in the market. I think you're going to see builder enthusiasm. You're going to see lots of fantastic things for you all to participate in. So even if you're feeling a little bit down today because it didn't go your way, look at it this way. Too soon to tell. You're in real estate. Things are coming back. It's your job to participate and have a good, optimistic outlook, because your clients, your past clients, your friends, your family are looking to you for leadership.
There is a sense of relief, if for no other reason, not because Trump won, but there's, it's certainly the case for a lot of people, but there's a sense of relief because the damn election is over.
Because it's over.
Because it's over.
Because
right?
those damn texts aren't in your phone anymore.
Oh my gosh. Finally, all of that crap is gone, and all the vitriol and all the name calling and all the juvenile behavior amongst senior citizens is behind.
What are people even going to talk about now?
Can you imagine going, this is actually kind of a funny thought. Like, look at how these, let's call them men in their 70s. What would be a funny and nice way of saying
Yeah.
gentlemen, elderly gentlemen?
Yeah.
I mean, look, can you imagine being at like a Thanksgiving party and your two grandpas were throwing barbs at each other like like the president did with Trump, or Trump did with Biden, and all this sort of name calling? It's just so juvenile. Funny, but really asinine.
Everybody's over it, I
Yeah,
think.
but it made its way into our culture. It made its way into just all of our lives. And everyone is sort of on edge. That is what you can all look forward to being in the rearview mirror. And I personally am so glad we're going to be entering into a different phase in the country, because this really is going to be a different phase in the country.
Yeah.
And I mean, I could talk forever. A lot of people are like confused about tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what you guys, I know we're bouncing around, but we told you we didn't have a script today.
Script.
Well, so here's the deal with tariffs. If Trump puts in place tariffs, which he certainly is going to do, what that does is it basically levels the playing field so that imported goods can't underprice, and essentially steal the market away from domestic producers. And many of you know this, but it was unbelievable that this was actually happening. The largest Chinese electric car manufacturer was building a factory in Mexico, actually building it, and they were planning on flooding the market in the United States, and essentially killing the domestic electric car industry and all the ancillary businesses that the battery makers and all the rest of it. That is actually what was going to happen. And there was nothing that was happening with the old administration to really stymie that. I mean, obviously the construction was happening. They knew about it. Well, Trump said, we're going to tariff the hell out of those cars. And so that when you bring them to the United States, you're not going to undercut the domestic electric car industry. It's still in its infancy, believe it or not. And that's going to happen with a lot of things that have been flooding the markets and undercutting the ability. Like if you wanted to open up a business right now making, I don't even know what, baskets or something, and you looked at all your costs and you wanted to have your baskets made domestically with U.S. hands and U.S. materials, but then there were baskets that were being imported from, let's say, China, that were undercutting the your ability to make any profit, let alone even run a viable business. Well, your basket manufacturing business wouldn't have gotten started. That's what's happening a lot with the United States, is that you couldn't make a business work because you couldn't compete with the imported items. So what happens is tariffs do raise the price on the imported items. And yes, that will raise the prices for U.S. Consumers. That part of it's 100% true. So criticisms of tariffs, that's true. But here's what Trump said, getting to it, that I think is really exciting. He said if we do the tariffs correctly, we could actually potentially get rid of federal income tax.
How about that?
I don't know if you guys heard that, but that is what he said. And Julie and I got to thinking, I think we talked about it on the podcast 2 weeks ago, if there was tariffing to the extent you could get rid of federal income tax, and all of a sudden that 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50% some people are paying in taxes, if all of a sudden that money wasn't going to tariffs or wasn't going to taxes, yes, you're going to be paying more for items, but it's certainly not going to be as much as you were paying in federal taxes. What are you going to do with that money? I know what people are going to do with that money. They're going to open businesses. They're going to buy more homes.
Stimulate the economy.
Stimulate the economy. You guys see how one hand washes the other? That's what we're going to start experiencing in this country again, a freeing up of ideas, at least conversations that have been taboo in the past with regards to expanding the economy. And people are terrorized by the amount of debt that the country has. $32 or $33 trillion is ridiculous. But now Trump's going to say they're going to be putting a focus on, making it so that, well, Elon said he's going to start, what is he calling it?
The Office of, it's basically managing government expenditure.
Yeah.
I'm glad you read my mind as usual, Elon up, because, look at what he did when he bought X, right? Didn't he fire, I think it was like 80% of surplus employees in X lives on to this day, right? So he's cutting down expenditure, and you put a guy like that in charge of figuring out, pretty sure he can at least read a government expenditure spreadsheet, right? He's sending rockets to Mars. He ought to be able to handle this. I have a lot of enthusiasm for that.
She's, in case you guys don't know about it, Elon is given an unofficial cabinet position where he's going to basically he's in charge of going in to the government. I can't even imagine.
Making it more efficient and getting
rid of redundant expenses, because there's a lot of it. There are all these departments and all. Again, if you've ever dealt with new construction in any heavy regulated community, If you're in Southern California and you try to do a remodel on your house, anything like that, all the layers have kept people from saying, well, screw that. I'm not even going to bother spending money to remodel my house. There's parts of California in particular near or on the coast where the homes, you can't even do anything to your house. You just basically have, you can't do a remodel. You can't do an update because somehow some regulation is making it so that you could do it if you were willing to put in, sometimes millions of dollars and take years and years and years to get past the red tape. Well, people just end up saying, I'm not going to do it.
Nope.
And now you expand that to what's been happening with new construction and all the rest of it. All of that's going to be set aside. Well, I can't say all of it, but a lot of it's going to be in flux. And you're going to see a lot of people that are going to, have their hands up and, they're going to go crazy because they are employees of the government, because they are maybe, government employee adjacent. We have a lot of coaching clients in Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia that are worried about what's going to happen to housing. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to housing in those marketplaces. They're going to get sold and new people are going to buy them. That's what's going to happen.
Oh, those markets are going to heat up. I mean, every time things change. So I think overall, in summary, we are cautiously optimistic and very relieved.
Yes, and you should be too. And now, what do you do with this information? The last thing you want to do is basically wait around until the spring to get your butt back to work. You need to absolutely take the actions necessary to make it so that you are going to benefit from this inevitable and massive boom in the economy and also for housing. Yes, be cautiously optimistic. Don't overcommit yourself to branding or marketing or things that are not going to deliver more or less immediate results. Accept the fact that your best days in real estate are ahead of you. If you think your best days are behind you, what are you going to do to make that not true? In other words, if you think your best years in life and your best years in housing, your best years everything are in your rearview mirror, think of all the things you're not going to do today. You're not going to exercise. You're not going to try to learn something new. You're probably going to avoid feeling motivated. You're going to avoid making contact with folks that might do a real estate deal with you. You're going to do the bare minimum just to keep at your bare minimum mindset.
Which would be self-fulfilling of the negativity, wouldn't
Exactly, which means you're locking in your future not being as good as your past because you're not willing to do or weren't doing the things necessary to make your future better than your past and make it so that your best years are ahead of you. And it doesn't matter how old you are either. So stop using age and race and education and where you live and where you grew up. Stop using all those things as an excuse. Start just for a second trying on the idea that your best years are ahead of you. If you want that to be true, what are the things that you need to be doing now? And obviously, we want you to consider joining Premier Coaching. We've made it easy for you. Just go to premiercoaching.com or text the word Premier to 47372. So we can all have a collective deep sigh.
over.
The main thing is, let's all get back to work. Please share this podcast with others if you felt it motivated you, educated you, and the action we would like you to take is definitely sharing with others. Have a fantastic day. We'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.